Up this Baron Trump's Marvellous Underground Journey. We're on chapter 22. Sorry for the delay. The palace of ice in the golden sunlight, and what I imagined it might contain. How we were halted by a couple of quaintly clad centennials. The Cultiquirps, His Frigid Majesty King Galetus. More about the ice palace, together with a description of the throne room. Our reception by the king and his daughter Shenanpool, brief mention of Bullybrain or Lord Hothead. Scarcely had I advanced 100 yards beyond the portal where I had halted when, happening to turn my eyes to the other side, a sight met them which sent a thrill of wonder and delight through my form. There, upon the highest terrace, stood a palace of ice, its slender minarets, its high lifted towers, its rounded turrets, its spacious platform, and its broad flights of steps, all glittering in the sunlight, as if gem-studded and jewel-set. It was a spectacle to stir the most indifferent heart, let alone one so full of ardor and buoyancy as mine. But dear friends, even admitting that I can succeed in awakening in your minds even a faint conception of the beauty of this ice palace, as the sunlight fell full upon it at that moment, how can I ever hope to give you an idea of the unearthly beauty of this palace, of ice and its glorious surroundings, when the moon went up in the outer world at a later hour, and its pale mysterious light was poured through the mighty lens in the mountainside and fell with celestial shimmer upon these walls of ice. But the one thought that oppressed me now was, can this beautiful abode be without a tenant, without a living soul within its wonderful halls and chambers? Or may not its dwellers, overtaken by the pitiless cold, sit with wide-open eyes and icy glare, stark as marble, in chairs of ice, white frosted hair pressed against icy cushions, and hands stiffened around crystal cups filled with frozen wine of topaz hue, while harpers' fingers cling cramped to the wires, stiff as the wires themselves, and the last tones of the singer's voice lie in feathery crystals of frozen breath, white at his feet. Come what may, I resolved to lift the crystal knocker that might hang on the outer door of this palace of ice and awaken the Castilian, if his slumber were not that of death. In a few moments I had crossed the level space between me and the first terrace, which it would be necessary for me to scale in order to reach the second and then the third, upon which stood the palace of ice. Imagine more than surprise upon finding myself now at the foot of a magnificent flight of steps, hewn into the ice with a master hand and leading to the terrace above. Springing lightly upon this flight, with Bulger close at my heels, I suddenly set eyes upon two of the quaintest looking human beings I ever remembered seeing in all my travels. They looked for all the world like two big animated snowballs, being clad from top to toe in garments made of snow-white fleece, their skull caps likewise of white fur, leaving only their faces visible. In his right hand each of them carried a very prettily shaped flint axe, mounted upon a helve of polished bone. Striding up to me and swinging their axes over my head in altogether too close proximity to my pole to be particularly pleasant, one of them cries out, "Halt, sir! Unless his frigid majesty Gladius, king of the Cultiquirps, awaits thy coming, his guards will, at the signal from us, roll a few thousand tons of ice down upon thee if thou darest proceed another step. Therefore stand fast and tell us who thou art, and whether thou art expected. Gentlemen, I said, kindly lower those axes of yours. I will convince you that his frigid majesty hath nothing to dread in me, for I am none other than the very small, but very noble, and little very famous Sebastian von Trump, commonly known as Little Baron Trump. Never heard of thee in all my life, said both of the guards, as if with one voice. But I have of you, gentlemen, I continued, for now I recollected what the learned Don Fum had said about the frozen land of Qualticorpse, or cold bodies. As proof of my peaceful intent, like a true knight, I now offer you my hand, and beg you that you will conduct me into the presence of his frigid majesty. No sooner had the guard standing next to me drawn off his glove and grasped my hand than he let it loose again, with a cry of fright. Zounds! Man, art thou on fire? Why, thy hand burned me like a flame of a lamp. Why, no, my friend, I said quietly. That's my ordinary temperature. And thy companion? Hath even a warmer heart than I have, was my reply. Well, our word for it, little baron, exclaimed one of the guards with a chuckle. There will be no place for thee except in the meat quarry, possibly after thou hast been cooled off for a week or so. His frigid majesty will be able to have thee about. This was not a very cheerful prospect, for I had no particular desire to be laid away in the royal icebox for a week or so. Anyway, the only thing to be done was to insist upon being conducted at once into the presence of King Qualticorpse and abide by his decision. One of the guards, having saluted me by presenting his battle axe in real military style, faced about and began to ascend the grand staircase with intent to announce my arrival to his frigid majesty, while the other informed me that he would conduct me as far as the perron of the palace. I was wonderstruck with the beauty of 3 staircases leading up to the ice palace. Massive balustrades and curiously carved balusters, springing from tower pedestals crowned with beautiful lamps, all and everything, to the crystal clear sides of the lamps themselves, was fashioned from blocks of ice. It proved to be a good climb to the top of the 3rd terrace, and I was not put out when the guard solemnly lowered his battle axe of flint to bring me to a standstill. The sun in the upper world was no doubt nearing the horizon, for a deep and beautiful twilight suddenly sank upon the icy dominions of King Geldus, and to my surprise and delight, through the great slabs of crystal-clear ice, which served for windows to the palace, streamed a soft radiance as if 1,000 wax tapers were burning in the chambers and galleries indoors. It was a sight to gladden the eyes of any mortal, but if I had been spellbound by the beauty of its exterior, how shall I tell you, dear friends, of the curious splendor of the interior of the Geldus Palace of Ice, as it burst upon me when I had crossed its threshold? Hallway led into hallway, chamber opened into chamber, through portals gracefully arched and winding staircases climbed to upper rooms, while hanging from lofty ceilings or resting on graceful pedestals were 1,000 alabaster lamps, shedding light and perfume upon this glorious hum of his frigid majesty Geldus, king of the Koltykwerps. Long rows of retainers, all in snow-white fur, lined the wide hallway as the guards conducted Bulger and me into the palace and bowed in silence as we passed. To my more than wonder, I saw that the inner rooms were most sumptuously furnished, chairs and divans being scattered here and there, all covered with superb skins of white fur, while the floor, too, was carpeted with them. And as the soft radiance of the alabaster lamps fell upon these magnificent pelts and set 10,000 jewels in the walls and ceilings of ice, I was ready to admit that I'd never seen anything half so beautiful. And yet I was still outside the throne room of His frigid Majesty. At length we came to one end of the broad hallway, which seemed shut off from the rest of the palace by a wall thickly encrusted with strings of great diamonds, each as big as a goose egg extending from the ceiling to the floor and turning back the shimmer of the lamps with such a flood of crystalline radiance that my eyes involuntarily closed before it. Involuntarily. Think of my amazement when the two guards, laying hold of this wall of jewels, as I deemed it, drew it to the right and left, till there was room for me to pass. What I had taken for a wall of jewels was but a curtain made up of round bits of ice, strung upon strings and hanging like a shower of diamonds there before me, as they glittered in the light of the lamps, each side of them. I now stood in the throne room of His frigid Majesty, the King of Koltykwerps. Now I realized that I had seen elsewhere in his palace of ice was in reality but a sample of its magnificence. From here the splendor of King Geldus' castle burst upon me in its fullest strength. Imagine a great round chamber lighted with the soft flames of perfumed oil streaming from 100 alabaster lamps, the walls lined with broad divans covered with snow-white pelts, the floors thickly carpeted with the same glorious rugs, while on one side, glittering in the shimmer of the 100 massive lamps, stands the icy throne of the king of the Koltykwerps, decked with snow-white skins, and he upon it with Shunbol, his fair daughter, sitting at his feet, and all around and about him, group-wise, 100 Koltykwerps, the king, the princess, and the courtiers, all clad in skins whiter than the driven snow, and you, dear friends, will have some faint idea of the splendor of the scene which burst upon me as the two guards drew aside the strands of ice jewels at the end of the hallway in the palace of ice. Like all his subjects, King Geldus looked out through the round window of his fur hood, just as a big, good-natured boy does through his skating cap. Oh, this is a little out of context here. It says the battle for life with the white crabs. The Koltykwerps were not much taller than I, but were very stocky built, so that when broadened out by their thick fur suits, they really took on, at times, the appearance of animated snowballs. Excuse me. It would be hard for the fingers of the deftest hand to draw faces fuller of kindliness and good nature than those of the Koltykwerps. Their small, honest gray eyes sparkled with boniform glint, and so broad were their smiles that they were only about half visible through the round holes of their fur hoods. I was delighted with them from the very start, and the more so when I heard King Geldas cry out in a cheery voice, "A right crisp and cold welcome to our icy court, little baron, but from what our people tell us, thou carriest a pair of hands so hot that we beg thee to take a few days to cool off before thou touchest palms with any of the quality-quirps. And we also beg thee to be careful and not to lean against any of our richly carved panels, or to slide down any of our highly polished railings, or to handle the strands of our jewels, or sit down for any length of time on the front steps of our palace. And we make the same request of thy four-footed companion, who is said to be of even a warmer disposition than thou." I bowed and kissed my hand to his frigid majesty, and assured him that I should make every effort to lower my temperature as speedily as possible, and in the meantime that I should be extremely careful not to come in contact with any of the artistic carving of his palace of ice. As I pronounced these words, the whole company began to clap their hands, and as they did so, a cold shiver ran down my back, and there was a sound, methought, very much like the rattling of dry bones, to that applause. But I took good care not to let King Geldas notice my fright. His frigid majesty now presented me to his daughter, Schneepool, a pretty little maid, about 16 crystal winters, with cheeks round as apples, and as deeply dimpled as the furrows of a cross-bun. Her eyes twinkled as she looked upon Bulger and me, and turning to her frigid papa, she asked for leave to touch the tip end of my thumb, which being done, she gave a squeaky little scream, and then began to blow on her tiny finger, as if I had blistered it. King Geldas also presented me to several of his court favorites, all men of the coldest blood in the nation. Their names were Jellican, Phosphorus, Ickles, and Glacier Boy. They were all dreadfully slow thinkers when you questioned them very closely upon any subject. It didn't take me very long to discover this. In fact, they requested me to be less warm in my manner and not to ask them any posers, as they invariably found that deep thought caused a rise in their temperature. This was, to be honest about it, very annoying to me, for you know, dear friends, what a lodestone my mind is, never asleep, always in a quiver like a mariner's compass, pointing this way and that in search of the polar star of wisdom. Upon making known my trouble to his frigid majesty, King Geldas, most gracefully ordered one of his trusty attendants to conduct me to the triple-walled ice cell of a certain culty-quirp by the name of Bullybrain. That is literally boiling brain, a man who had been born with a hot head, and a consequently very active brain. For 50 years King Geldas had been doing his very best to refrigerate this subject of his without success. As I was just bursting with impatience to ask a whole string of questions concerning quality-quirps, you can imagine how delighted I was to make acquaintance of Bullybrain, or Lord Hothead, as he was called among the quality-quirps. But, dear friends, you must excuse me if I make this the end of the chapter and stop here for a brief rest. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care. Bye.